Hello, my name is Michael Fine and welcome to Envision Tech's 5th CSS lesson about miscellaneous style attributes. Just a heads up, throughout the 5th lesson and the 6th lesson, the next one, we'll be talking about all these miscellaneous style attributes. So yeah, the first one we're going to do is width and height. Now I realize I talked about this in the last video briefly, but you can adjust the width by a percentage. You see? And yeah, the same with the height. You can also create a border like so. And this will actually create a small lined border between or around an element. So to do this, you could specify 2 pixels solid, and what this will do is it'll create a 2-pixel solid border. I believe you can also have a dashed border, but I'll show you later in practice. Also, opacity. I briefly talked about this, but you can actually make an element's color more opaque. And all you have to do is provide an actual decimal value. And you can do 0.5, which stands for 50% opacity. You can do 0.25, which stands for 25% opacity. And you can also do 0.75, which stands for 75% opacity. That's pretty much opacity. The next one I want to show you all is font size. And if you're reading this, I've written REM. That's one of the parameters. The way you can use the font size style attribute is, well, you can increase the size of the font, but there's many different types of numbers that you could give it, different types. You can give it a certain multiple of REM, which stands for root EM, root emphasized. This is sort of the default amount of emphasis on some characters. You can also just write it in pixels. For example, I can do 30 pixels like this. And yeah, that's interesting, and I'll show you how to do it later. And onto the third one, which is padding. This one will actually distance elements from each other. So it'll actually reserve some space around an element. And you can do some really cool stuff with this, and I'll show you I'll show you some examples later on. But for now, just know that you can input pixels, and yeah, it creates actual padding for the element. So let me show you how to use it in practice. So let's say we go to CSS lesson 5.html, and let's actually create the HTML file. I've set the doc type. Let's go with a title, and let's call it CSS lesson 5.6. I'll be using the same page for both lessons. And let's start off with a basic div. Oops. And let's make a second div, just for more experimentation. I'll put a paragraph element in that div, and I'll just write out sample text like that, and I'll write out second paragraph. Yeah. Now I can actually show you how this stuff works. but not if I don't link a style sheet. Remember, rel element, style sheet, href equals whatever I'm going to call it. I'm going to call it CSS less than 5-6.css. Yeah, it's just obscuring it. Did I misspell it? LSSON. Yeah, I misspelled it. Yeah. Yeah, I've misspelled it. But it's fine. I'll still use it. So let's differentiate our divs. Okay. Let's set up some, sorry. We would use the ID selector. What did I call it? Div1? Yeah, div1. And set its width to 100 pixels and height to 100 pixels. Don't forget your semicolons. I'll just copy this same information. It's not that important. You can set this to pretty much anything you want. I'm just experimenting with it for the time being. So the first thing I'm going to show you is width and height. You can actually do stuff like this. You can reference the same ID of the same element again. VS Code, yeah, allows it. I can do, sorry, width by 250%. And the thing I want to do here is make sure it's more visible. So I'll add a border. Sorry, let's say here and go with border, and I'm thinking about just a solid line of, oh, I don't know, 2 pixels. That'll be fine. Solid. That looks fine. Let's see if I can host the server. Okay. You can see the border. And actually, if I go into developer tools, you can see that one div is much bigger than the other. That's good, because I increased the width by a percentage. That is width and height and border shown. So let's try some stuff out with the opacity. Opacity, let's say 0.75. Let's see what it looks like now. Yeah, you can see it's slightly less visible. It may not be as visible for you, but I believe if I go into here and look at this, if I can get the file. Anyway, you can see that this opacity is being applied. This is how you apply it. So the next one is font size. Okay, this is going to be interesting. Let's say, let's use, oh, I don't know, 30 pixel font and put a semicolon there. And for this, use font size, let's say 2 rem. That looks good. Oops. Oh, yeah, because the previous one didn't have a semicolon. REM stands for root EM, or root emphasis. I actually went over the emphasis tag in HTML. And that is the default amount of emphasis provided to like a piece of text on a website. So if I look at the lesson file and reload that, yeah, it's suddenly much larger. And I can change that too. Let's say I wanted 5 pixel. Yeah, 5 pixel fonts. They're going to be really small. This one, that is. Yeah, it's really small now. And let's go with padding. So I'm actually going to show off something really cool that you can do, and that's apply attributes to both of them without having to go into this one and write this attribute applies by this much, and then go into here and say this attribute applies by this much. You can actually, same amount for continuity, you can just do that here. So if I wanted to enforce some kind of rule of padding to make the elements farther apart, I could do that and apply it to both of them at the same time. I think that's cool. So you can actually apply it to different parts of the element. Let's go with padding bottom, just so it'll be more visible. And let's say, oh, I don't know. You can do this in both REM and pixels. Let's try it with REM. Okay. And then later I can try it with pixels just to show you that it works. And now these should be a bit farther apart. That's not too visible. Hold on. I think it actually brought them together. Let's go something pretty big. 10 REM. Let's go here, reload, and suddenly the padding is pretty big. Yeah, it's allocated the stuff, as you can see in green. Unfortunately, the border still applies to the padding. And the second div also has that padding, as you can see on the bottom. And yeah, that's pretty much it. There's, just to review, for measurement, we have pixels, REM, and characters actually, but that's pretty much the width or height of a character, and you can actually use that as a measurement. For example, let me show you. If I wanted to have a width of, say, 250 characters, that would essentially forbid whatever text you write from going over 250 characters. It would actually automatically cut it off here and start writing it here if this was a div. Let's say 1 character. We should notice that something looks very different about this. Yeah. As you can see, it changed a lot. Yeah, it's much thinner now. So you can also use characters. That's something I forgot to mention. As well as pixels, which I believe I showed off that you can use. And that's pretty much it for this video. I'll see you again in the next one. Goodbye.